Welcome back, everyone. Michael here with Offshore Citizen. Today we're going to talk about international payment processing and high-risk merchant accounts. Okay, so first of all, let's just dive in a little bit to the subject of what is a high-risk merchant account. Okay, so high-risk is a very strange term because how the payment processors will define this, often something that you would never consider high-risk. For instance, I'm here in Bulgaria today, and I was talking to a friend who's based here, and he decided to try and set up something using a Bulgarian company. And what we discovered in the process was a lot of places consider, just because of the fact that it's based in Bulgaria, for it to be higher risk. And as a result, the rates are higher, the ability to get acceptance was worse, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So things are not always as they may appear on paper. Stripe recently came to Bulgaria, so he thought at first, okay, great, I can get Stripe in Bulgaria. It turns out, not for his business. And so that's the case, right? In other cases, you may find that there's a business that so let's kind of go back to the beginning. Card not present is always considered slightly higher risk than card present. Okay, meaning that if you're there with the card in person, you're swiping and you're putting in your PIN code, the banks will consider that to be lower risk. Okay, the fact that you're not present raises the risk level, but that's not usually what we mean when we say high risk merchant accounts. Usually, when we mean high risk merchant accounts, we're referring to one of two things. The first is that you have a high chargeback rate, okay? So people may ask, what's a high chargeback rate? Certainly anything over 1%, but usually, ideally, you want to keep it below like 0.5%, okay? There are some specific criteria that Visa and Mastercard have in terms of where they'll cut you off and how many are allowed per month and things like this, but overall, anything over 1% is definitely high risk, okay? And you should be, as much as possible, optimizing your business processes in order to keep that chargeback rate below 1%. Okay, so that's step one. Step two is you're in a situation where you say, okay, great, I need to have an industry that is considered high risk. So this would generally be adult, gaming, anything crypto related, anything Nutra related, typically things that have trial and rebills would be high risk. Drop shipping business models are so-so, right? A lot of companies don't like drop shipping. The reason is because the delivery time tends to be worse, so you have to be careful about that. And so, somewhere in that spectrum, you're going to fall. Now, what this means is that you're going to have much higher cost. Oh, if you get into something like peptides, very high risk, very hard to get and maintain, pharmaceuticals, travel, these sorts of things. Places that they consider there's a high chargeback risk, a high risk of fraud, things like that. Okay, CBD typically would fall into that category as well. So these are high risk industries, and what ends up happening is you've got certain processors who only work with low risk merchants. Right. So for instance, the main guys, Stripe, PayPal, Aiden, Braintree. You start running down a list. They will typically only work with low-risk merchants. And you'll see these, fairly attractive rates, etc. You're like, okay, great, this is perfectly normal. And then you discover, okay, hang on, but I'm in an industry that they won't accept, all right? So that becomes an issue for you. So that's the first piece is you need to be aware, are you high risk? Unfortunately, getting merchant accounts in general is a royal pain in the ass. Like the amount of paperwork, the amount of hassle, it's this antiquated industry. I've argued with banks about this a lot. And for instance, sometimes they'll say, oh, we want a void check. We're like, what? Who uses checks? What are you talking about? And they're like, well, we've been doing it this way for 30 years and it's been working. Shut up. This is retarded. So you have to understand, again, I've argued with banks about this a bunch, is they miss out on a ton of business because of the nature of their business model, okay? But unfortunately, the way that it works is you have to go down their process, and this means you're going to have to provide a lot of documentation. So I'm going to do another video later on how to get high-risk merchant accounts or how to get merchant accounts in general, but I want to give kind of a high level here right now. So now, what this means is that you're in a situation where you need to look at some other options. Now, where this also becomes a little bit complicated for you is it may affect your payment gateway requirements. So let's look at some specific examples. I was talking to somebody a couple days ago. They're using Kajabi, right? Kajabi, lots of people like the platform, run by Brendan Bouchard or partially owned by him or whatever. You may have ClickFunnels, you may have Shopify. There's a restriction on the payment gateways that they're going to accept, all right? So because of that, because there's a limited, Shopify is another example where they'll only accept low risk stuff, right? So because of this, you're kind of held in a lock. Similar, back in the day, I used to run a membership site, and I used a plugin called MemberMouse. Great little plugin, super happy about it, but they only supported a limited number of payment gateways, right? It was Braintree, Stripe, PayPal, and Authorize.net. Now, Authorize.net, fortunately, tends to be pretty widely accepted. NMI tends to be pretty widely accepted, and so, there's some options there. But often, you need to be aware you may be locked into a situation where the payment gateway is very restrictive for you, okay? So, this is another key thing. Okay, so let's say you decide to go down this road, right? First of all, what you have to accept right off the bat is that your fees are going to be quite a bit higher. So to give you some idea, Stripe will say charge 2.9% plus 30 cents a transaction, maybe 2.4% in some regions or with high volume. In extreme cases, 1.9% in regions like Hong Kong, 3.4 plus 45 cents, So regionally, it goes out, and that's one of the things that happens. Okay, fair enough. In high risk, to give you some idea, we're talking to someone placing them right now, and the rates start at 5%, 5.5, right? This isn't always going to be the case, but certainly can be the case. Now, this doesn't mean that it's not possible to get very cost-effective processing. For instance, talking to somebody the other day in the gaming industry, they have a very solid gaming company, been around for a lot of years, they're properly licensed, they run a good business, etc. They're getting rates closer to the low-risk rate, right? Similar thing, what you're going to see is there are some providers on the adult side who realize that, hey, listen, adult doesn't have to be high risk, and they're able to get, again, lower rates. But usually you're going to start out in, I would say, the 5 to 8% range, depending on your industry, depending on things like this. Now, here's something to be aware of. What these processors do is they don't typically have flat prices. So the way that it works is they'll have a buy rate and then they mark it up, okay? They unfortunately will not quote you on a fixed price. Again, I've argued with them about this. I think it's a stupid business practice, but they're basically like car salesmen. So what they want to do is they want to see what you're paying already, and then based on what you're paying already, they want to say, okay, well, we're going to go and we're going to get a little bit lower than what they're paying already, but we don't want to give up too much of our margin because they're making this margin, okay? They're making that spread. So that is just kind of the way that it is. Okay.